lateness from Councillor Blackler.
That was from Councillor Blackler. Thank you. Any others? No. So if I could have somebody move that, please. Moved by Councillor Deputy Mayor Halale, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. And secondly, do we have any conflicts of interest that anybody wishes to register today? Okay, if not, then we will move on to agenda item 3, and that is confirmation of the previous minutes. Remembering that in the previous meeting, there was nothing to speak to, public excluded, and so we only have public minutes for today. So I'd like to open it up for anybody who wishes to speak to the minutes. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, look, there's two matters of meaning that I'd like to just clarify before we move them. On page 8, one member is quoted as sharing their view that council was being asked to pay an audit fee in excess of 300,000, which they felt was ludicrous, and tempted them to suggest that council breached the requirement to use Audit New Zealand and seek an independent audit instead. In fact, I didn't, because I was the member, and I didn't say we should seek an independent audit. What I said was we should actually refuse to do any audit at all, because the next sentence goes on to say the chair intervened to remind the member and the meeting that an independent audit is a very valuable process. In other words, you were defending the very thing that I allegedly was seeking, because I wasn't seeking that thing. I was seeking that we basically thumbed our noses at them and didn't get an audit at all.
I appreciate that, and I will work with the government's advisor to change that accordingly.
The other correction, if I may, or question of meaning, the other on page 10, the third paragraph, starting with the words, the chair noted that revaluations of water, roading and land and buildings was a chunky piece of work for the team. Now, the next sentence, Group Manager Paul Hope noted that there had been an intention to revalue only 3 waters and land and building, but with so much movement in roading, there was a potential misalignment in the fair value, in the previous fair value assessment to what its current valuation was that deserved a revaluation this year as well. It does, I can't make sense of that second clause.
So what?
And I think it just needs to be either, well, I think maybe it's a previous fair value assessment compared to what its previous, what its current value was, or something like it. Just needs to be reworded to make sense, to be perfectly honest.
If you'll let me. So in the absence of Mr. Hope today, my recollection of that conversation was such that whilst the intent had been originally only to revalue 3 waters and lands and building, already we knew that the revaluation or the change in valuation for roading was going to exceed the materiality requirements of an audit, that we would need to do that in any case.
So we would need to do that.
So we would need to do that in any case. So the intent was always just to revalue, not just because it's always a chunky piece of work, but because there had been such a significant movement in the value of roading, there would be a requirement under the materiality commitments of the audit for us to revalue it in any case. And if not, even if we did an interim one, it would result in a significantly greater impact the following year.
Well, if you were proposing that as an alteration to the wording, I would move that we approve we adopt the minutes with amendments as agreed.
Okay, so I will go back and clarify that first one and just make sure that we do get the wording right based on what was on the live stream. But if Councillor Hopkins is prepared to move that, can I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Ryan. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried, and we'll move on now to agenda item 4, decision reports. And in the absence of Mr. Hope today, I will hand over to Ms. Nichols to talk to this, please.
Okay, so the first report is the Treasury strategy for the first quarter of the next financial year, 24-25. So we've given a bit of an update on the current situation of our investments, including all our borrowings to external entities. And then the other side of the picture is our borrowings from our GNZ, our GFA. So that's the current situation, and we're proposing tracking in line with our normal Treasury strategy. in the same way we have in the past. I did want to point out that our cash holding expected at 30 June is a lot higher than we thought it was going to be. There's about 7 million sitting there. So obviously we've just had our 20th of the month payment and it was a lot lower than we expected. We thought there'd be a lot more significant capital projects closing out before the financial year. So it's a lot higher than we planned for, and we're working with departments to try and protect the cash flow needs a lot closer going forward so that we don't have such a high cash holding at any given time.
Thank you. And we respected this before, and it'll be minuted from previous meetings. This is causing me increasingly more frustration if I look at our cash. So we're currently sitting at $20 to $21 million over what our budgeted debt was for this year. We've been sitting with at least $7.5 million on call deposit since April of this year, earning 2.75% interest when it could have been in a term deposit earning 6% interest. My basic math says that's costing us at least $5,000 a week in lost interest revenue. And I look and we've spoken about this before, and what's happening is that debt was raised to spend on capex based projects, and we're not spending the capex. And I'd like us to understand why, for better cash flow purposes, we need to understand why we're not spending that capex. If we're not spending that capex, when are we going to spend that capex? Because, you know, we've got another $7.5 million coming up for refinancing on June 17. That's currently sitting at 5.75%. I would be pretty disappointed if we rolled that over when we've got $7.5 million sitting in the bank getting 2.75%. So I guess I'm interested in understanding how we can drill down and get more information about who and why that capex isn't being spent, because it's unfortunately going against your budget. You know, it's going against your budget line, and it's like you're suffering because of a lack of information.
Yeah, so that's something I've talked a lot about, zeroing out the budgets in the new financial year, working a lot closer with the departments to really understand. I brought another paper that talks about the carry forwards. So we're trying to work a lot closer and a lot earlier with the departments to find out exactly what their needs are, whether they actually need those carry forwards or whether we can scrap them all together and thus not carry forward extra cash like this. We wouldn't like, it's not necessarily that we would put it in longer term deposits. We just don't want to be borrowing it in the first place. So yeah, we want to get more in tune with what the departments actually need to spend and make sure we're only borrowing accordingly, not having any extra cash sitting around, not making us money.
Thank you. That is somewhat reassuring, and be very happy to work with you on cash flow forecasting, and, you know, even working with the likes of our advisors, Bancorp, to see whether there's anything out there that can assist us with that. But I'm conscious I've been talking a lot, and I'd like to open the floor up. Councillor Hopkins.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm very grateful that you have raised the matters you have. I'm just curious to know, on page 6, I've got 3 questions. On page 16, there is a reference to the fact that at 14 June 2024, we held a further 8.8 million in the call account, earning 2.75%. I'm assuming that's what the chair was talking about. And my question is, why we have said repeatedly, and this matter has been discussed for years, literally over 2 or 3 years now, that we want to have as little as possible in the call account and as much as possible in the other accounts. So how has this been allowed to happen? And was there no term account into which that money could have been put? That's question number 1. Question number 2, on page 17, I'm just curious if somebody can explain, particularly with the FRBs on that page and the next page, the radical difference in the interest rates charged. We've got some there at 4.93, 6.22, and others at 0.73, 0.84, 0.93. maturing at around the same time. So I'm just wondering if there's some explanation for that and 2.3 on the next
Yep.
page. And my third question, the total borrowed is showing at 71,641,005, but the very next paragraph, the 23-24 annual plan projected council borrowings would increase to 50 million. Well, I mean, a member of the public is going to say, which is it? And we know it's the bigger number, 71. So why are we saying 50 immediately below that? And why is there no explanation of the variation between what was projected and what is now the case?
Okay, so I'll have a crack at the first two. The first one your first question around why do we have so much cash when we said we didn't want to have any cash is exactly the conversation that Amanda and I have just been having. The reason is that Amanda goes to them and says, we've still got $7 million, $8 million sitting in here. Are you going to spend it this month? And people are saying, yes, we probably will, and don't. And so that's why I need to see more accountability around commitments to spending CapEx, because Amanda and the finance team are going out and raising this debt because they're being told it needs to get spent. To be told that it needs to get spent and not spend it is not only inefficient, but it's extremely expensive. So that is why we need to do what we need to do.
So basically then the only justification for it being in there in April and staying from April to June is that in April and in May, our officers thought they were going to need the money. And so they couldn't put it on a term account. And again, it would be helpful to have that explanation to us today.
So yes, well, we can't get that explanation. Well, Amanda may be able to sort of speak more to it, but in short, yes.
Yeah, so that's what I was trying to say at the start. So obviously that was dated mid-month, 14th. We're talking about 8.8 sitting there on call. We couldn't really go put that in a term deposit when we're expecting on the 20th of the month to have to pay the bulk of that out to the capital creditors.
Okay.
But it didn't happen.
Did you have a supplementary?
Well, are there no, could that 8 mil not have gone in April into a term account for a month or something?
A month is effectively the same as call.
Okay.
Right, so the longer you put something onto, could it have gone in April for 3 months and earned us more? Yes, if we'd been told that it wasn't going to be spent. Yeah. So that's exactly what I'm on to work with Amanda and the finance team on investigating over the course of the next month or so, but it's immensely frustrating. Your second point around the table of fixed rate bonds, think of these as fixed term mortgages which get entered into at different periods of time. If you took out a mortgage 4 years ago, you might be sitting at 3%. If you take out a mortgage now, you're sitting at 6%. That rate that you see in there of 0.73% that matures on the 15th of April 2025 could have been taken out six to 7 years ago at a significantly lower rate. And your third, so yeah, I guess it may be helpful to see the date of initiation in there as well, if that provides you. But as a general rule, think of it as mortgages that are entered into and matured at different periods of time. Your third question around the 50 million, Amanda, would you like to have a crack at that?
Yeah, so that's just simply noting that we're currently sitting at 71 million, but the annual plan predicted it would only increase to 50 million. So actual is 71, but we predicted we would be at 50.
Are we satisfied we've explained sufficiently to the public why that difference exists?
So this is the Treasury report talking about the strategy for Treasury, but we have a financial report that comes every month that tells you the variance explanations.
And we will move into that in agenda item 5 and be able to talk through that more. But yes, that $20 to $21 million difference can be explained and can be explained to the public. Councillor McKone.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's now or later, but I have two questions, and one is that I see this as just a comment really. The market says that the ORC is not due to be moved till February. Do we actually budget at that number, or do we just keep going with what's in front of us rather than try and predict what they're going to do? And the second question, I've just forgotten at the minute, but I'll come back to it.
Yeah, we budget at that number, but we obviously fix it for a year. So we set our annual budget, that's set. So whatever we set in June is set for the year. So we're not like fluctuating the borrowings amount throughout the year. So when we set our long-term plan, for example, we'll get the 10-year projections and we'll lock that in the budget.
And we'll get that, we'll get that off our advisors. So it's not Amanda and the team finger in the air and working out what they think it'll be. We're taking it from them. And so, yes, current forecasts or current market conditions suggest that you're not going to see any drop in OCR until at least February of next year. But that's not guaranteeing that there will be one then, of course. You've remembered your question.
I remember two of them actually.
Oh, you remembered one and found one.
Yeah. So one, I know it's crystal ball gazing, but has there been an indication on the amount of the grants compared to next year of what we're looking forward for next year is what we've had? And the second part of that was, you know, I understand you've got to carry over cash flow to cover off what projects may or may not come in. If there was a robust business study done with each one of those projects, would that help the assistance of your forecasting of cash?
So I guess, unless you want to say otherwise, I think to both of those questions, when we get on to agenda item 5.2, long-term debt profile, there's a table in there that we've already discussed in council this morning, but it looks at what our forecast grants are out for the next couple of years so far. And so we can probably talk to that a little bit better then. And then we've also got, I think in the very next agenda item, Amanda, a discussion on the carryovers and the level where they're going. So it might be worth holding that one until then, if that's okay. I absolutely will. Further questions? No, thank you. So if there are no further questions, and based on the discussion that we've had so far, can I have somebody please move that we accept the report? Moved by Councillor McCone, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. All those.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we're not asked to accept the report. There's a series of recommendations on page.
Sorry.
14.
Sorry, I'll reword that. Can I please ask for a mover to accept the recommendations of the Treasury report?
Yeah.
Councillor McCone, seconder. Councillor Hopkins, thank you. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. We'll now move forward to agenda item 5.1, the financial summary, where again we'll be able to address some of those questions that have both been asked and will be asked. But Amanda, is there anything you'd like to talk to at the start, just as key highlights?
No, just to highlight, this is quite a high level summary for the period to 31 May, and we'll get more detailed results for 30 June next meeting. So it's a similar sort of variances that we've had all year. The big ticket items in revenue is not having the grant funding for the Sports and Event Centre due to timing of that project. So that's putting us under budget by about 5 million in revenue, and then the other side expenses are a lot higher than budget that we've talked about a lot previously. You can see the level of detail on page 22 broken down. We've tried to split out the contractors so you can see it by department. Yeah, it's the exact same story that we've talked about other months. We've also broken down the capital expenditure like previous months, and then gone on to talk about potential carry forward budgets. Just to note that the carry forwards on that page 24 is quite high level, and we didn't have the detail to hand when this paper had to be put in. So I have more detail about the numerous water projects and other specific projects if anyone would like. It's just to do with timing.
Yeah, and we'll definitely move on to those, I think, when we get the opportunity. Sorry, did you have any other opening comments that you wanted to address there? So I think just from my perspective, a couple, and I appreciate this is high level, but a couple of these are rollovers from comments that I've made previously. On page 22, I still struggle with the fact that, you know, for example, with roading, we're spending $1.1 million more on contractors, but we've underspent capex by 4 million. So, you know, what are those contractors doing? Because they're not building new stuff, so we must be repairing and maintaining old stuff. And if we're spending 1.1 million additional dollars on repairing and maintaining old stuff, that feels like quite a bit of money.
I'm just suggesting, Mr. Chair, that one of the quite considerable contractor items, I think around $1 million or more, could be the design work on the Kakanui Bridge. So it wouldn't be, that would be an engineering contractor that.
Yeah.
I'm just making a suggestion that could partially explain that.
Thank you, and that's the sort of thing that makes the concerns go away. I guess my overarching comment is when I see significantly more being spent on contractors for a function that we're spending less on capex for, it just gets my attention. There was another little thing in there about the fact that we were about 380K under budget for personnel costs reflecting vacancies. That pretty much shuts itself down with the extra 280 that we spent on backfill for vacancies. So I think that's probably negligible. I see Councillor McKone has a twitchy hand up, and so I will hand over to him.
But again, it's always a bugbear, and you probably know it's going to come anyway, but its waters seem to constantly exceed their budgets. And I see the 2 mil and another 2 mil over in their capital expenditure. So yeah, is a budget not a budget? It's a question I ask.
Yeah, I'm keen when we get to it to talk about some of the carryover too, because this is a flow on from the conversation that we were having earlier about having money in the bank because we're not spending money because we're being told that we're going to start projects that we're not starting. But when I look on here, there is extra money being spent on capex for waters, for example, and 10 million of carryover that we're wanting to do in there. And I just don't feel like we have enough information, and we certainly don't have enough surety around what's happening in that space for us to be able to manage cash flow effectively. And Amanda has committed to working on it. I think maybe now would be a good time, Amanda, for you to just talk a little bit more about the carryover and the request from last month for us to provide more detail about it and why we're in that sort of not hiatus but intermediary position where we're burning reserves but not forecasting debt properly for the associated capex spend, and how you intend to remediate that in following budgets and years.
So as you know, you just approved the annual plan budget this morning. It all balances. We've been through all the projects and worked out what you need for the 25 financial year, and you would have done the same last financial year for 2024. And then in August last year, there was some carry forwards added, things that hadn't been finished in the 23 financial year. So there was a lot of capex that is added to the figures on the bottom of page 22. So you can see water's budget there is only 12 mil out of the 41 capital expenditure, but they also had carry forwards from the 23 financial year. So they're working on that, would be incorporated in the 14,972 spend, plus a bit of their budget for the 24 financial year. So it's kind of like always got projects on the go from the previous financial year. So if we look at the carry forwards that they're proposing on page 24, so if I can give you a bit of a detail on the 10 mil, there is Oamaru reticulation is about 1.8 million for renewals in progress. There is 3.1 mil of Oamaru water supply for the South Hill Reservoir, membrane replacements.
And we can send this. We
Yeah, I
can
can
send this
send you more
around after,
detail.
because you don't have to write down all the details of it.
You
But
email it to me, I'll upload it to the thing.
thank
Yep.
you.
There's some work in Odamatata that's being carried forward for renewals, filters, water mains. What else we got? District wide, there's various renewal projects, about 900K. For 2.4 for renewals in Waihemo. What was that one? Windsor, 800K. So across the district, there's a lot of work that's ongoing at the moment that was in the 24 financial year that will need to be, it's underway. It'll need to be finished in the 25 financial year. So they're suggesting about $10 million worth will need to be added to the annual plan budget that you've approved this morning. So that's where we get the bit of a mismatch when I'm trying to report the finances and we have like a debt figure set in our annual plan. And then, so say it was 50 mil, but then we approved 20 or 30 mil of extra capex in August last year. So that's where it never marries up because we have to fund that from somewhere. And then I get cash on hand, ready to fund it, expecting it to come out on the 20th of the month. And it's still getting carried forward into the next financial year. So it's just a whole lot of timing things, trying to understand all that. And I guess that's where we're coming back to just finance working a bit more closely with the departments to try and understand these budgets and when they're going to happen. Your point before about business cases and stuff, like a lot of these, like they have contracts and there's scheduled payments and things. So just really, while we can put that in a cash flow spreadsheet, we need to have the conversations and see what's actually happening. Has that tender been delayed? Is that on hold? Is there a weather event? Like when's the actual payment going to come out? And make sure that we've got the most up-to-date information all the time so that we can plan our cash flow to the point, and to know what financial year these projects will happen. And whether it's possible to do all that work in that financial year as well. Like obviously Waters we've just approved a massive annual plan budget of CapEx and then also suggesting another 16.3 mil across the board to add on to that. So is it practical that we can get all of that completed? Is there maybe some projects that we've just approved in the 25 annual plan that might need to come off?
So I think thank you, that's really useful. And creating that registry of carryover projects will help out a lot with being able to do the budgets next going forward. So for example, the 14 million plays 12 million that we're looking at in this year is not that we've overspent $2 million of projects that we were planning on doing for this year. It's that there was some from the year before that we didn't do that we've done this year, and there's some from this year that we're not doing that we're doing next year. And it just so happens that that works out at a $2 million difference, and we just need to get better at that. Mr. Cook, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just wanted to support Ms. Nichols. The executive leadership team have heard your concerns, which you've raised at this meeting and at previous meetings. And I can assure you that it is a feature of the work going forward through transformation, that this project management and indeed the financial management is going to have a lot closer emphasis because of the key importance of managing cash flows going forward and the debt profiles that we're facing.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. That is very exciting to hear, and I shall keep a watchful eye and ear on it. Councillor McKone.
Yeah, you've taken all the air out of my voice, Roger. I'm pleased to hear that, and I think that's awesome because I think the biggest thing, considering the financial space we're in, is actually having an ordinary finance process. And if we know where we're going and what we've got on hand, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to run a business.
That comment will be all the more poignant when we move on to agenda item 5.2 and the long-term debt profile. Councillor Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, 2 or 3 questions. I'll refer to them to you. I wonder if it's possible for you to sound a little bit more excited when you describe something as being exciting. It's just a request, given that you've also mentioned poignancy in almost the next sentence. Amanda, dumb question perhaps, or probably almost certainly. Page 22, took me a while to just trying to decode actual and living. And in the end, I worked out that living wasn't actual and actual was actual, because initially I thought it was the other way around. Why is the word living there? It doesn't make any sense. So I'm thinking also of lay people reading it, trying to decode what that word actually meant. More significantly, you've told us, I think, on page 24 that you're going to actually amplify what I think is a very unsatisfactory level. The report says officers have undertaken a high-level review of projects, and then the information we get from water is numerous projects, which doesn't seem to me to be particularly high level, but I think you've said we're going to get more information about that. Are we really intending to spend $1 million on the roof of this building? And the next question is at the very bottom, we're saying after allowing for the NZTA subsidy relating to the roading works, the increased expenditure budgets will result in a significant increase in the level of projected external borrowing from the current 24-25 annual plan of 99 million by at least 16 million. So is that an additional 16 million over and above the 71? So, I mean, is this, are we getting out of control here?
Let's give Amanda a chance to answer.
These are your decisions. So the living budget refers to, it's not the annual plan budget. So your annual plan budget is set in stone at the start of before the financial year. And then we have a living budget, which is tweaked as we go. So like Project Reclaim's a good example. It's been moved into different periods and things like that. So
Adjusted or?
Yeah, rather than tweaked, let's call it brought to the council and agreed
it hasn't been brought to council.
sometimes, like for extra capex, for example.
Okay. It's just timing differences. So Project Reclaim was it's just a prime example because it's a big one that's moved significantly over spanned 2 financial years. So the budget's approved at a certain time frame, but then it ends up creeping into another financial year and that sort of thing. We can change the terminology of living budget. The second question, the re-roof is budgeted. It has an approved budget through the previous annual plan of 1 million. That's carried forward for a couple of years now, and it was talked about as part of this annual plan. And the 16 mil, so you can see roading is 200k there, 0.2 million. So even if we had some roading NZTA subsidy towards that, we would still be looking at about 16 mil total. All of this capex here would need to be funded by debt. So that is on top of, so you talked about 71 million is our current debt position is 71 million at 30 June 24. That's where I expect it to be next week. And then by 30 June 25, the annual plan that we adopted this morning has a projection of 99 million. So what I'm saying, the capex and the debt that we approved in the annual plan this morning, we are also looking at having to add extra capex of 16 million, which will be funded by debt. So 16 mil on top of the 99. So we'll be looking at 115 million by 30 June 2025.
Assuming all these carryover projects are approved and completed within that financial year.
And everything that has been budgeted in the 25 annual plan is completed in the 25 financial year.
But yes, this is the issue with carryover projects and not having them landed into the budget properly, which is what Amanda's working on improving going forward, but she's stuck in this interim piece now. But yes, should these carryover projects happen, the $99 million of debt that was approved by the council in the annual plan would go up to 115.
No.
Yes.
71 next week.
71 is what we've got now.
Yes.
99 is what you've approved in the annual plan. And when we look at the long-term debt profile in the next agenda item, you'll see that sitting in there. And then there's in the long-term plan, you've got it going up and up and up again. Yeah, so 71 now, 99 next year. The 99 next year doesn't include these $16 million of carryover projects. So they would need to be debt funded as well, which would take it to 115. So are we risking living beyond our means? Absolutely, which is the topic of conversation for agenda item 5.2. Councillor Blackler, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Neil. I'm just struggling to reconcile how the 16 million of carryovers doesn't already flow through in terms of basically undrawn debt from this current financial year, or is it because yes, we haven't drawn debt on those projects, but we've overspent in other or brought in new projects in other areas? And if so, can we just have a high level reminder of what the breakdown of those are? Is that, have you got that at hand, the top 3 or 4? Why we haven't delivered all our capital works program, but we've already overspent on
So
the,
prior to your joining the call, we did have a discussion around mistiming and the issues associated with carryover from previous years going into last year and creating spend and then carryover and then the underspend going through, and the fact that all of these projects that are carrying over were all based on debt funded spend, and so the debt wasn't raised for them. But to your question, additional debt was raised for something. So what was that additional debt raised for? Amanda, do you have on hand the ability to answer a couple of those questions of Tim's?
I don't have specific projects, but it's a lot of it's to do with like the carry forwards that were approved for last year. So stuff that was from 23 financial year that wasn't finished. So that has beefed up the debt balance where we thought it would be from where we thought it would be now. We also had that issue last year about the opening balance wasn't quite right, which came from projects that were flagged as being funded from reserves that had no money left in them, so had to be funded by debt. So do you remember last year, in the budget last year? So we thought in the budget, we made the budget balance because it was going to be funded by reserves, but there was not funds in those specific reserves, so it had to be debt funded. So it's another reason why the opening position was significantly higher than we thought it was going to be.
so does that explain a good chunk of the quantum of difference there,
Yeah.
the reserves issue?
The reserves issue, the carry forwards from previous year, just timing of a lot of projects, and just general overspend, like as we talked about the CapEx, it's like waters is higher.
So are we going to have the same, based on what we adopted this morning, are we going to potentially have the same issue, same conversation again next year, and that this 16 million isn't included?
I think really importantly, we're aware of the 16 now, and we're raising it and bringing it up now, and also to an earlier conversation that we were having under transformation and the change in structure, there'll be a lot closer relationship and oversight between finance and the projects to understand timing, mistiming, and associated cash flows around that. But we've all agreed that this can't continue and that we must put in place better cash flow forecasting and better debt and fund management than we have now, because we can't continue to do this.
I guess, is it just part of the annual plan process as to why this hasn't, potential carry forward budgets list hasn't been included in that?
Yeah, I guess it's just timing of when the plans are adopted. That's why I purposely wanted to bring it forward in June so you could see it now, so you could see the full picture today when adopting the annual plan, and bearing in mind that there's these projects that are ongoing and still need to be paid for somehow, so you can see the whole picture. And also I want to zero out these budgets, so like really closely look at every single one of these projects and see if they actually need to carry forward. And if they do carry forward, does that come at the cost of something else? Like, is there something in your 25 financial budget that you won't get onto now, or we can't afford to do now because you're still doing 24 work, that sort of thing. So to hopefully prevent having this conversation next year.
Yeah, so I think I'm really pleased with the additional oversight that Amanda's bringing to this, and the transparency with which it's being shared. And I take comfort in knowing that they will try and do everything they can to reduce that carryover as much as possible. And if that involves the deferral of other less necessary projects, then that's something that would get brought to the table. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, pondering over this, there's probably a simple answer to the question I'm about to pose, but not being an accountant, I don't know what it is, the answer I mean. I would have thought, forgive me if I don't explain this clearly. At some stage in the past, we have approved a roading project, to seal a strip of road from, my place to the neighbours or whatever, or, Tim's sister down the road. And we've said, yes, we'll do that. I have never, whilst on all the years I've been on the council, I've never voted to approve a project without knowing how it's being funded. If we carry forward the project, surely we also carry forward the agreed funding solutions.
Mhm.
And if we do that, then the funding solutions that have been agreed previously already exist.
Mhm.
So we've already said that the ceiling of the road from my place to Timber Sisters is going to be loan funded, and we know that. So when you tell us it's a carry forward project, we shouldn't need to raise a second loan to pay for it, because in other words, the loan quantum shouldn't change because that's part of the package. But what you're saying today is, oh, we've agreed these projects, but effectively we never said how they were going to be financed. So now we're going to have to go, well, how else can you explain an additional $16 million worth of loan funding? That's my question. Surely that would have been agreed then and just be moved forward with the figures.
Yep, so it was always going to be loan funded. That loan funding has not been drawn down for those specific projects because they haven't been incurred yet in the 24 financial year. There is no loan for these carry forwards haven't happened yet. There's no loan for them. They were always going to be borrowed down in this financial year, but it hasn't happened. But because of carry forwards from the 23 financial year, that borrowing has affected our balances for this financial year.
Right.
So
Sorry, I'm a bear of little brain, but if we've said that we're going to spend, this will be funded with an $5 million loan, then, you know, all these numbers, we had them this morning, we were told that these things would happen if we didn't change. In other words, we presented a whole series of numbers that were presented as actual when they were, in one sense, conceptual or hypothetical. So numbers on a page don't necessarily bear an absolute equivalence to reality. But if we've agreed the $5 million loan funding, then we shouldn't have to add another $5 million to the budget.
If I may, and I'll try and reach into my inner thespian and be a little more excited. The $16 million worth of projects that were to be debt funded, that are carryover projects, that debt was never raised. The money was never drawn down. The money was never, the 20 million of extra spend. Forecast. The $20 million of extra spend that we've got for our 71 now is overspend from previous years. Amanda said she's not able to provide all of the detail about that, but we will work on getting more detail around it. But we never took the $16 million out of the bank to pay for these things because we hadn't started them.
So it's line items of forecast.
Yeah, you've got all of the problems of previous years that get dragged into this year, and then we've got the problems of this year that we didn't borrow money for that we're going to need to for next year. Councillor McKine.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I'm looking for a solution more than anything. So the solution will be stop carrying things forward from now until we clear up the book from behind us so we know exactly where we stand. And if you can't do the job in the financial year, say so or don't do it. That's why I put it bluntly. The other thing is on page 22, it scopes expenditure and it's got depreciation there at 18.5 mil. That'll be just a paper entry, is it? We won't have that sitting in the bank. Page 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the annual depreciation charge exceeds budget because of the revaluation of roading last June. So it's been over all year. So we're expecting it will be about 1.2, 1.3 by 30 June over budget.
So it doesn't exist though, does it? It's paper entry. So if you net it off against the actual expenditure to that, we're actually not that bad. If you understand what
Yeah, so depreciation is not a non-cash transaction, but it is money that we want to be putting away for funding the assets going forward.
Thank you.
A question perhaps, Councillor McKone has proposed one solution, that we stop carrying forward until we've. Would it be fair to suggest that another solution would be for us to say to ourselves and to you guys, find $16 million worth of savings elsewhere?
So I think that is one of the very things that Amanda was referring to before. So that's not being locked in. This has been a really, really fruitful and useful discussion. And what we're working through collectively is that we need to put in place far better transparency, forecasts and solutions around this. I think by Amanda and the team starting to raise the carryover projects and surfacing them at this level is exactly what we need to be doing. And Amanda's already committed to going away and working with the teams to understand where we can either not do those carryover projects or let them carry over again, or find some projects that we don't need to do that can take up some of those carryover projects. But nobody right here, right now is asking for councillors to commit to an additional $16 million of funding, taking our debt to 116. Sorry, Councillor McKay.
Sorry, I have two more final questions, I suppose. Loans to other entities, I see that's up by 4 mil. Can we have a wee bit of information on that? And secondly, I'd just like to comment, $1 million to do the roof on this place, a standard home is $70,000. So I'm just wondering what the difference is and where.
Okay, the second question is an incredibly operational question that we as a governance team don't need to talk to, but we can resolve it. That I'm sure has been dealt with properly at an operational level, and the business case will come to you.
You can scrutinise it.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll put that second question to bed. The first question, the extra $4 million of loans to other entities. Yeah.
Yeah, so we, during the course of the financial year, there was extra lending to Waitaki District Health Services, Amarama Airfield,
Wayland Lodge, all of which were bought for approval.
for approval and funded by debt. So that's another reason why the debt was higher.
Yeah, and I commend the team on the closure of that mismatch book that we had a while ago, and the fact that we've now got the timing of the rates that we borrow from LGA FA really well aligned with the timing of when we reset the rates for that on lending that we've got. And you'll see that's resulted in very, very close financial costs, financial revenue numbers, which I think is really commendable. Are there any additional questions? If not, sorry, Councillor Blacklock.
Thank you. Just on the P&L kind of high level update. I was just wanting to understand the overarching context of our forward debt projections and the depreciation, finance costs, etc. Well, let's say we deliver a waters project, and that project would presumably obviously be debt funded. That project, there'll also be some depreciation coming in year on year against that project going forward. So does that explain why, like, in previous sessions we've had, there's a forward projection for the 10-year period of around $600 or $700 million of spend, but the debt profile at the end of that period is looking at around the 450 million mark. So is that essentially the depreciation paying principal, if you like, and will the reserves be servicing the interest, or will the finance cost always be kept separate and rated for? Do you get what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So like in an ideal world, 100 years ago, when you started putting in the waters assets, you would start depreciating them, so that by the time it needed renewal 100 years later, you had all that money there and you didn't need to debt fund it. You'd put away money every single year while you used it, so the money was sitting there to replace it. So a while ago I talked through our reserves balances, because we didn't start building the reserves until, I don't know, 80% of the useful life had been incurred of the assets. The reserve balances were never going to be enough. And then we've made decisions like in 2020, we didn't increase our rates. So we just depleted the reserves further. So we're going to have to make a decision as we go into the long-term plan, what our financial strategy is in terms of rebuilding those reserves, what sort of balance we want to get, how, like, obviously the debt servicing cost increases a lot. So we need to think about how that's going to be funded. And it all comes into like decisions about the use of debt, how long to spread the cost of that over, like spread the cost over various generations of ratepayers and that sort of stuff. So big philosophical conversations to happen through the financial strategy to build into the long-term plan for those future debt projections. But at the moment, yes, you want to use your depreciation reserves as much as you can for new CapEx like that, but we just don't have the level of reserves, so the bulk of it has to come from debt funding. So does that answer?
Yeah, so essentially there's kind of two components to a capital works project where you take what you can from the depreciation reserve and top it up with debt for and the debt servicing is raised through rates rather than the depreciation reserve covering the cost of borrowing. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. That is a wonderful segue into agenda item 5.2. If there are no further questions with agenda item 5.1, could I please ask for someone to move that we receive the information in the financial summary? Moved by Councillor McCone, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. And thank you for the good conversation that was held throughout there. I look forward to the conversation that we will have with agenda item 5.2, the long-term debt profile. So before I hand over to Amanda to speak to this and then open the floor up for questions, we were all present at the council meeting this morning and at the public session where there was some discussion from Ray and some questions raised about the table at the bottom of page 25 of the PAR report. We've been wanting for some time to be able to bring the long-term debt profile, the forecast long-term debt profile, to the PAR members, and it's really good to see it here today. One of the important things to note when we go through this, though, is that once you start to go out beyond those first couple of years, there are a heck of a lot of assumptions in here that haven't been locked down as yet. For example, you know, at the very top line where it was pointed out this morning that you're looking at potential rate increases over that 10-year period of 100%. That's not obviously set in stone right now. If you look at the other receipts from other revenue lines, and this goes back to the question I think you were asking earlier, Councillor McCone, about grants and the receipt of grants, we have got some pretty good surety about grants going out to say 2026, 2027, but after that, we don't know what they are as yet, and we can't put in what we don't know, as per the comment that Mr. Palmley made this morning around operating expenses and employee costs, and the fact that we're going through a transformation program at the moment, yet it looks like personnel costs are going up by 30% yet. Transformation hasn't bedded down yet, and we can't bake in here assumptions that we can't bake in here outcomes that aren't different to what we can confidently back and support. So I just ask for you to exercise some of those filters when we're going through and we're talking about this today. The really important thing that the really important thing that I want to highlight here, and that the graphs on the corresponding pages highlight here, which we're all acutely aware of, is current forecasts see us borrowing an awful lot more money than we're borrowing now. You know, $71 million this year. It's looking at going up to $450 million over a 10-year period. A couple of problems with that. One, well, we don't have the ability to borrow that much money. We're going to talk about some potential solutions in here that might help you to borrow that much money. Some of those are very short term though, and we can talk through the discounting, but we don't have the ability to borrow that much money over the course of that period of time. And you know, we need to work very hard on whether we should actually even be thinking about that much. So I commend Amanda and the team for putting together 5.2. I think it's a really good discussion piece for us to have, and I can see hands going up all around. Yours first, Councillor McCone.
Well, firstly, I actually totally agree with what you're saying, and I think I commend the team for putting all this out in front, because it's easier to solve a problem early on than actually have to crash and burn trying to solve it later down the track. Secondly, and I like the way, well, I was always taught, always plan for the worst and hope for the best. So if you put the worst scenario out there, you can actually improve on it dramatically. And we all have an opportunity now through a whole lot of different things. I take on board, the rating and put the rates up. It seems to be a standard cry, which we no longer can do. It can't be done. There's got to be a better way of looking at things to do it. And we have a perfect opportunity to do it now. We can't do it later, but if we start that process now, it's got to help. And I think there's a whole lot of stuff we can get in here and get our teeth into and actually restructure the way business is done. So again, I commend it, and I think there should be some pretty interesting discussion coming out of this, because technically if we carry on the way we are, we're not going to go anywhere.
Thank you, Amanda. I realise I didn't give you the opportunity to talk to anything in here. So if there is something you'd like to bring to the table.
Anything to add? You covered it well.
Excellent, great. Further questions, Councillor Hopkins?
The report is stark and alarming, and it clearly has alarmed some members of the public. The notion that our rates take's going to double in 10 years from 45 to effectively 90 million. Interest charges end up from 2, 5, nearly 3 to 15. There are other matters that I could ask. I guess there's a question, are we being unduly complacent on page 26, having produced these indications that we're going to be borrowing, jumping from 99 mil, which is actually plus 16 mil, we've just heard this afternoon, but that jumps to 457, 260 and 2034. But underneath that, the sentence reads, the debt levels are not alarming in terms of the level of assets that council holds, and the balance sheet remains healthy. Well, I mean, this is my question.
Can you please get to it?
Well, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
Apologies. Is that, how can we say that when, in fact, the next page we say we're not allowed to borrow what we've predicted on this page, we will borrow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the assets we hold, how many of them could be realised or liquidated or used anyway? I'm just wondering if that sentence is actually not a little bit unduly complacent.
Well, it's not. I don't accept that it's unduly complacent. I accept that it is financially correct. If you had a house that you had 25% of debt associated with, you would say that the debt levels associated with that house were not alarming, and that the balance sheet of your property were reasonable. That's an absolutely fair statement to make. The problem is that your house is worth $18 billion and you're on $100,000 a year salary. That's the problem here, Jim. Not that the balance sheet is not sound. Every dollar, to Tim's point before, every dollar that's being borrowed is being invested in an asset that has a value that sits in there. Sure, you can't sell it right now, just like you can't sell your house right now. But the statement that the debt levels are not alarming in terms of the level of asset ownership and the balance sheet remains healthy is financially correct. It's the cash flow that's not.
Okay, I won't argue with you except to say this. If I own a house, I can sell the house in total. There are a whole lot of assets that council owns that I suspect it cannot sell, and would probably be legally prevented from selling by Parliament if no one else ever tried to.
I don't, and I appreciate that, and I don't have the level of local council governance to argue that, but I would also argue that those assets could be regarded as being of local, if not national, strategic importance, and they're not going to disappear overnight either. So I understand what you're saying, but from a balance sheet perspective, from a financial perspective, the debt's okay compared to that. That doesn't mean it's a good thing at all. None of us are agreeing with that, but that statement is correct in a financial sense. Councillor Blackler.
Well, thank you for putting this report together. It's really good to, get the conversation started. And obviously this is just the beginning. We have to work through it, but, I guess just a high level observation is, some of the suggestions here, to address the breaches of the covenants, like they're all good and valid suggestions for solving the problem at this end, but I don't think they solve the problem for the people that are paying the bills. Because ultimately it's whatever way we structure things, this is all going to land on the ratepayer one way or another, whether it be from this entity or another. So I would like it if part of our focus was on that as well, as opposed to just being focused on how we meet the thresholds that we're working to.
Thank you. I think one of the most important things that you said just there, Councillor Blackwell, was that we're at the very start of this, and that this is the primer for significant further discussion. Some of the things that Amanda and the team have brought here today are, firstly, if we keep doing what we're doing, we're in trouble by 2027 because we simply won't be able to borrow it. So we can't keep doing what we're doing. There have been some to address that. So, for example, we could net off the on lending that we've got from the borrowing. That saves you for about a year at most, and so it doesn't really achieve anything. One of the other things that we could look to do would be to try and get a credit rating for the council, as many of the other local councils around the country that we know of do. But again, that only sees you right for a couple of years. It's also quite an onerous thing to keep up those credit ratings. So there's some potential solutions that buy you a bit of time, but we're not here to talk about buying time. We're here to talk about a lot of the other things that we may potentially do. There's discussion in this paper about setting up a CCO. And some of the potential benefits with that and stripping it out from the council and having to do that. There's also wider discussions going on amongst many councils about creating a collective CCO that may have benefits associated with it. All of these discussions that we're having and that we're starting to initiate have the ratepayer front of mind, because we cannot continue the way the way that we are from both a debt covenant servicing purpose, but also from a care of duty for our ratepayers and community. So we're looking, or the very purpose of this agenda item is to start looking at ways of preventing what's being forecast here from having the impact that it could potentially have.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just simply asserting that some of these suggestions don't actually address the ratepayer directly, but the ratepayer issue. I guess ultimately the primary driver is what the forward projection of works is and the timing in which it's expected to occur.
Yep.
So we can beat around the bush with all these things, but ultimately, if we continue at the rate at which we are, people are going to incur the cost one way or another. It may be distributed differently, but
You're absolutely right, Councillor Hopkins.
There's not a lot we can do about that, though, if indeed it's another entity that's actually imposing the cost. I guess my question, reading this report, I thought maybe it should have gone directly to council in the first place. Second thought I had was, what is PAR going to recommend to the council, or is it going to recommend anything? Because we've got these various options: the credit rating, the holding company, the CCO, and then the increased income and or reduced spending. And I'm just wondering if there's any view as to which of those might be the most fruitful to explore, that, the credit rating might not achieve much. I'm wondering if the holding company proposal would have merit, and if so, how we might advance that or make a recommendation to council on that matter. Looks as though we're probably going to have to set up some more CCO, so that may be a given other than a discretionary option. So I'm just wondering if this, can anyone give a sort of a advice as to what, if there is a preference as to solutions, and if so, what it is?
Yeah, so look, Amanda, jump in if you feel you need to, but I think Councillor Hopkins, it is really important that this paper came to PAR first. PAR is the committee that's tasked with looking at, risk, audit, financial risk opportunities. And I think that around the table here, we have a really useful discussion before it goes to council. You're also right in that PAR can't make decisions, but can make recommendations. I think from both all of your reading of this paper and from the discussion today, there is, we could probably collectively agree that there's very little value in progressing the net debt argument. But I do think that PAR should be recommending that the council empower officers to look further at the costs and benefits associated with receiving a credit rating, because there are costs and benefits that are far wider than just being able to increase your covenant. There are potential advantages with regard to interest rate savings by having a credit rating. You can borrow at a lower rate, and obviously, if you're borrowing $10 million, that's not quite as relevant as if you're borrowing $100 million. And so I think we should be recommending that council direct officers to continue to look at that cost benefit. And I think at the same time, in any case, there is significant work going on within council, and as the ELT representative here today, Mr. Cook, can talk further to it potentially, but there are ongoing conversations both within council and between councils about establishment of water CCOs and the benefits, etc., associated with that.
Oh, okay. I took it from your earlier comments about the credit rating process that you said it would buy us a year at the most, or maybe two.
That was with regards specifically to not breaching the covenants.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. So I just took that as something that might be less fruitful to explore than a holding company. And I'm perfectly happy to support what you said, but I would have thought I'd want to know more about a holding company as well. I mean, the CCO thing, we're being driven to that like sheep in a pen by Parliament anyway. But so the other two options that are here, as well as reducing services or increasing revenue from other streams, those are things that we can constantly monitor on an annual basis. But can somebody tell me what the perceived benefits, or you've said there are benefits to having a credit rating, what about the holding company?
Amanda, do you want to speak to the holding company at all?
Well, I've spoken about it in the report. So a holding company is quite beneficial when you have a public sector council and then a lot of commercial organisations underneath, because you can have the separation between the public and the political sort of side of things, and then running a commercial organisation like just for profit in return. So the holding company is nice to sit in the middle and manage that. So like the statement of intents, the leaders of expectation you did this morning would be run at the holding company level with more of a commercial focus as opposed to come through the board. So that's a good benefit for that. I guess I have concluded that in Waitaki District Council's current state, the main commercial CCO that we have is Whitestone Contracting, who has its own commercial board. So then I didn't really see the point in having a second holding company commercial board on top of that. If there was a range of different companies underneath, but just for one, I didn't really see that the cost benefit weighed out. Because there's also the extra cost of having a board and the overheads of running an extra company like that. So.
Yeah, no, I get that, and I read the report. What I was trying to work out was It doesn't seem to me, am I right in assuming that that won't necessarily affect the amount of money that's borrowed? It'll just change the borrower. So, I mean, but I suppose because we are not the borrower anymore, it will get us under the, keep us under the LGFA radar and et al, et cetera. So that's the benefit. Is that correct?
The covenants with LGFA are for the whole group. So you would have to take the whole group picture. It wouldn't change anything in terms of the covenants. I haven't talked about that here for that reason. So it's the group picture, the group borrowings that's taken into consideration. So even if we had a holding company and put in a water CCO underneath it and shuffled all the debt down there, you'd still need to meet the same thresholds in terms of the group.
But by separating it out, you have far greater transparency and far greater separation from the other assets. And so I guess you're able to operate it as a more commercial entity than you would if it was sitting under the council as an asset now.
So say the likes, if you had the water, if you took 400 mil, say in 10 years' time, the 400 mil of the water's debt goes to a water's CCO, and then they've got, I don't know, $1 billion worth of assets offsetting it. And as long as they're sustainable, so that they have enough income, whether it be through rates or targeted water rates directly to that entity to sustain that level of debt, they were sustainable on their own. And then council would have not much debt left. And I'm just saying the thresholds for borrowing from LGFA would be all of it added together, the whole consolidated group. It couldn't change the thresholds.
I'm sorry, if I can, I mean, this is rapidly becoming an educational session, but I think it might be helpful. But so what are the benefits? I keep on hearing Parliament in relation to local water done well, talking about the benefits of off-balance sheet investments and how things can be, I take it, off-balance sheet. And that, but what you've actually said is there's no such thing. What I think I've heard you just say is there's no such thing as off-balance sheet. Even if it was off-balance sheet, we'd still get captured. I misunderstood that.
This is fast becoming an educative session, and that's okay because it's tricky stuff. But I do think, as part of what we're doing, we will come back with pros and cons of where we're going. But just to answer that balance sheet question, it is off council's balance sheet. It's on the CCO's balance sheet. So they're looked at separately and then merged up from an accounting perspective later on, similar to what we do with Whitestone now, for example.
And therefore, the CCO's balance sheet would only become part of council's balance sheet if council had a holding company that included the CCO.
Oh no, if it doesn't have to necessarily have to have a holding company, it can be a standalone CCO, just like we have with the likes of Whitestone now. Okay, so what we'll do is that we'll come back to you and talk about the benefit, the pros and cons associated with holding companies versus CCOs. Your friends up the road in Timaru have a holding company, for example, but that's because they've also got things like ports and electricity networks and all those other tricky things that go in there that are nice to have separate. So this is an educative process. This is the start of the educative process. I think the conversation here today is really, really useful and has raised a lot of great questions that we will be able to build into that exchange that we have with you, Councillor McKone.
Yeah, look, you pretty much covered off what I was thinking about, Simon, and I think it's important because, again, while it'll be kicking the can down the road in the respect that the debt is still going to be there, it gives you room to manoeuvre and to actually identify and put a microscope over where the money's going and what's being done. So I think that's very important. The other question I have is actually at the bottom of page 26, and it says LGFA, employed council, is allowed to borrow up to 175% of total revenue. Now, to me, that's 1 3/4 times what you actually take in, you're allowed to borrow. So how on earth does that work? What I'm getting at is a way for us to structure it so we can borrow 50% of our total revenue, and then that's going to put some CapEx projects way back where they should be.
The benefit of hindsight. You should have done that a while ago. So this is the highest threshold that we can apply when we borrow from LGFA being a non-guarantor council. And this is the same threshold that we have applied in our financial strategy as we set the last long-term plan. So we've stuck with the 175%. You could have gone any level that you wanted to. You could have put it at 50. Obviously there was a reason in the past where you were happy to go to 175%, and now we're getting close to it. So you can't reduce it to 50. We're already almost there.
I mean, point one, and I agree with you, just because you're allowed to do something doesn't mean you should do something. And point two, to Amanda's point, is we are where we are now through history and through development. We have the debt that we have. It would be impossible for us to say, right, we're going to get to 50% in the next 3 years. So the very purpose of this agenda item and the discussion today is to talk about what we do going forward and how we reduce the impact on the ratepayer as much as possible with what we do going forward. And that's why when we talk about some of the benefits of CCOs and potential multi-council CCOs, or if not multi-council CCOs, then arrangements in place with other councils to help with things like procurement, with things like minimum standards or benchmarked project types that we do. There have to be some synergies and advantages in working closely with our peers and sharing resources and sharing knowledge. And by doing that, we have to be able to either reduce our debt or reduce the cost of servicing the assets that we've got. And those are the sorts of things that Amanda, Roger and the team will investigate on your behalf.
Just one further comment to that, and I totally get it. It says on the top of the next page is borrowing costs to exceed no more than 10% of rates revenue. We must be pretty close to that right now. And it also says on page 72, we're $1,500 above the per rateable property benchmark. Our interest costs are sitting at 14% of rates, and our something else I saw. Oh, debt servicing is 4% of revenue. Now, all the 5 or 6 options that we've been given here, I think are excellent. But number 5 really ticks my box, because charity always begins at home. So I think we've got to look very hard at how we do it and how and when we do it. And I think the when is actually now.
I think everybody around the table would concur. Are there any further questions? I think this has been a really useful discussion, and certainly given us some good guidance and steer as to what level of detail we need to continue to come back with as we work through this. If there are no further questions, could I please ask for somebody to move that we both receive and note this information?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that, but also I'll pick up on the point you made before. So with your permission, I will move as follows: that the Performance Audit and Risk Committee receives and notes the information and requests officers to prepare a report outlining the costs and benefits of the remedies proposed to resolve future unacceptable debt profiles, or the future unacceptable debt profile singular.
Okay, I just have one question with regard to that, and it's literally just with reference to the phrase "prepare a report." We're not gonna fix this thing with just one report. So can we have could we phrase it as prepare a discussion document, an initial discussion document, or something?
That's fine. No, more than happy.
So whatever you
prepare an initial discussion document outlining the costs and benefits.
I would just not like to see us pin our hopes on this report saving. So, Councillor Blackburn.
Could I just ask a question, Mr. Chair? Is this not part of the conversation that will underpin the long-term plan? And so, in which case, are we able to just emphasise the need for a focus on it through the plan rather than requiring a separate discussion document?
Look, rather than try and rehash it, I think the amended wording that the chair has proposed would actually capture the matter that Councillor Black has raised. An initial discussion document could well say this is what the LTP needs to address. So I was trying to pick up on the point you were making.
Sorry, governance.
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is actually a memorandum report. You don't actually have a specific recommendation from officers other than just to receive a note of the information. So I think the fact that the discussion, and as you were heading to your summary, Mr. Chair, you said that you thought it gave sufficient guidance, and I think that that could be done. And then when you get to next time, there could be something that comes back with a recommendation for an officer that deals with something else coming back. But at this point, it was a starting point for discussion.
Thank you for that clarification.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Recommendations can be changed. We've had instances of that today on more than one occasion. And it is perfectly possible for a member to move a recommendation that is at variance with that is in the document. And in this instance, the amended recommendation reflects a desire of yours. And I would suggest you're perfectly entitled to rule that the recommendation as mooted, if we can find a seconder, will stand or will not.
I didn't have a problem with us formally noting that we expect that council will want to pick up on this and there'll be some continued reporting done. I'm also comfortable with Councillor Blackler, but Councillor Blackler has seconded the requirement, and so on that basis, I'll ask if we can have a vote on it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Sorry, Mr. Cook.
I just noted that you already taken to the vote, but I was hoping to ask the members of the committee to reflect on the comments that were made around we're about to enter a long-term plan again. We've already discussed that this is a multifaceted solution here, and reflect on the time and cost of time and effort. So if officers are preparing a report to one part of this, then that takes them away from other work that could potentially provide a solution in the long-term plan and more discussion.
Thank you very much for that, and I apologise for not coming to you before the vote. I think what we'd had with the change in that recommendation was that we're not preparing a specific report, and I think going to Councillor Blackler's comment and your reiteration of it with regards to the long-term plan fixing this, I think the work that is going to be going on anyway will be suffice to cover what we've noted in our recommendation today, and which is why I was so adamant before when speaking with Councillor Hopkins that we weren't preparing a report that was a solvable be-all, because this is part of an iterative process. So I'm comfortable that the recommendation simply captures the fact that the PAR recommends council keep a pretty good eye on this and work very closely with officers as we go through the long-term planning process.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Did we capture the outcome of that vote? Okay. Governance advisor. If not, again, we have our mover, we have our seconder. Could I please ask all those in favour to say aye?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. That is carried, and was a very good discussion. We'll move on now to agenda item 5.3. And I welcome Ms. Spring to the floor, who's eagerly been awaiting the presentation of the risk update and has happily sat through the discussion to date. So Ms. Lyons is away at the moment and Laura has stepped in. So I will hand over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few things to highlight in this quarter's risk update. There has been a change in the risk exposure reported through the key risk register. So we've seen one risk changing in its residual risk score to increase, and there's been one risk that has decreased, and we have also added one new risk to the register. So our change capacity and resilience risk has increased from a residual risk rating of medium to high, which reflects the ongoing transformation activity that's happening at the moment and the organisational restructure, but it's anticipated that will decrease again later in the year. The risk failure of a closely related entity has decreased from a rating of high to medium, following the transfer of ownership of the hospital to Health New Zealand to Ora. And the new risk that has been added to the register
is relating to affordability and financial sustainability. It does have a score of very high, so it's one of the highest rated risks on the register, but links to all the discussions that have just happened in this committee and in your annual plan discussions earlier in council as well. There is another risk that did not change in scoring this quarter, but we are monitoring it closely. So that's the natural environment and biodiversity risk. So we'll just keep an eye on that to see whether anything happens that would warrant a change in that risk in the upcoming quarter. So we're sitting with 7 key risks that have a residual risk rating of very high, which are noted in the report. And just to flag at this point also that we will be reviewing the risk management policy in the coming months. So we'll be continuing to look at how we monitor and manage our risk exposure as we move forward. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Before we do take questions, I'd just like to, and I should have pointed this out at the start, but there is another risk that happens sometimes, and that is the risk that we have a typo and we forget to chuck a column on where we should have, and that risk has made itself present today. So the tables that you see that outline the risks on pages, I think 36 onwards, we're missing the left-hand column, which is, I think, a description of the risk that's since been rectified and uploaded to convene. So risk recognised, control put in place, risk closed down. Thank you very much. I think I really do commend you and Amelia on the work that you're doing. And if I look at the risk framework and risk management processes that we've got in place now compared to 3 years ago, they are poles apart. Yes, this is the 4th consecutive quarter that we've seen an increase in the number of key risks being assessed as very high. And that's never a great thing, but I think recognising that one of those risks that have been identified as being high today is the risk associated with, the transformation process that we're going through at the moment. Obviously, there's risk when you look at any significant piece of work like that, but I am really confident that that the team are managing that risk as well as they can, and I'm also really confident that risk is for a fixed time only, and so we will see that reduce again. But I'd like to open the floor up to any questions. Sorry, Councillor McCone.
Look, I'd just like to make the comment that I know we've got to do this, but to me, a lot of that is just good, straightforward common sense. Is while we've highlighted it, I don't think it's actually an issue. Will be my comment.
I absolutely agree. A lot of it is good, straightforward common sense, but it's really important that we document and capture that straightforward common sense in organisations like this. It's really important that where we identify risks and and significantly where we identify controls. So if we say we've identified a big risk over here, we've identified a whole lot of controls that we've wrapped around that risk, it's not good enough for us to just say that's fine, it's being managed now, we'll move on. We need to make sure that we test those controls on a regular basis. We need to make sure that they're real and that they exist. And that's not just we're not just talking about a climate change risk here, we're talking about health and safety risks, we're talking about all sorts of other bits and pieces. It's common sense, but you've got to capture it and you've got to be able to share it and you've got to be able to raise it. And really importantly, Laura and the team need to be able to call out where they don't think risks are being managed appropriately, and for us to look at what we can put in place to remedy that. Deputy Mayor Halale.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just looking at page 35. I'm pleased that you've included the economic and social wellbeing. I hadn't seen that prior unless I'd missed it. Just thinking in terms of the controls around just including a focus of it with our financial strategy and just our overall strategic framework, just to kind of ensure that we do have some kind of focus around that. That's the last risk identified on page 35.
Yeah, mine's really little writing. I can't get anywhere near that right now. But, yeah, no, it's okay. Did you have a reply to that at all?
Just that we can take that back to the ELT when we're next discussing it and make sure we capture your concerns around that.
Yeah, I think it's really useful.
No, thank you. It was just more of an investment, like into it as opposed to just, like managing relationships and planning.
Mhm.
So it's just having a focused investment kind of included in there. For example, housing development, things like that.
Thank you. Any further? Mayor Kircher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, good to see the breadth of risks described there. Having heard from you about the importance of that we do take note of risks and so on. I'm just wondering with the health and safety side of things that we have perhaps a refresher for elected members, the governance team on their responsibilities, because I think we may have done something early in the term, but I think it's time to refresh ourselves on that and get an understanding of what our responsibilities are.
You're absolutely right. We did, and during my first term, we did have a quarterly update on health and safety. My understanding was that had been moved on by in the second term to be a committee report up to the leadership team on a regular basis. There was either an activity report or a business report that followed through there, but I would be very happy to see an update come to here again at one of the next PARs, even if that is a duplication of a process that's going on within the current leadership team. Governance advisor.
Sure, you, Mr. Chair. To you, Mayor Kircher, were you requiring another briefing, a refresher briefing? Is that what you were looking for?
That was certainly a
Yeah.
substantial part of looking at because I think everyone was loaded up with all of the induction and so forth early on, and actually to make sure that we have a clear understanding of our obligations, particularly legal obligations around health and safety would be good.
So my understanding was that was being addressed at a council level in a different way than through the PAR now, but I see Mr. Cook has his hand up, and so I will defer to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The health and safety update is provided through the council activity update mechanism, which covers many of the departments in council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think what the Mayor is looking for is a briefing for the governance team has certain responsibilities under the Act, and I think that's different to what the COWA report is providing at an operational level. And I think the Mayor and I have spoken about this before, and I think I get what he's talking about, which is why I sought the clarification. So I think it's a governance team briefing on those higher level governance related responsibilities under the Health and Safety Act.
Thank you. Does that reflect your?
Yeah, because we do get the updates through the council activity updates, but it's actually making sure we pay attention to those, but that we are perhaps a little bit more rigorous in what our questioning might be around various things. So
I think between the two of you, you've got this, and I'm confident that our governance advisor will capture it in the minutes and it will come back to us as requested. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. Noting your comments before about transformation being a risk that's possibly being managed well at the moment and also has a limited life. I still wonder whether it shouldn't be, well, I'm just asking officers whether it doesn't warrant inclusion in the very high or high risks, at least for the immediate future, because there are risks that it won't meet with internal acceptance or things of that nature that may see it diluted or in some way derailed. The other question I would have is I'm just wondering if in terms of risk assessment, I notice we've got a very high risk affordability and financial sustainability. I guess my question is based on what we've just been talking about, the previous item with regard to the debt profile. Is it worth adding that idea of an unsustainable debt profile to that risk? Because I would have thought what we've said today is, hey, we cannot allow this to happen, and it won't be allowed to happen. But at the moment, in the absence of here's what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen, shouldn't it be identified as a particular and specific risk or a component of that affordability and financial sustainability risk.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me have a crack at that and Laura can chime in whenever she gets that I'm wrong. Transformation is captured under this risk, change capacity and resilience risk. It is sitting there as high.
Yes.
Sorry, on page 30, third paragraph from the bottom. The risk, change capacity and resilience has increased from a residual risk rating. That is the risk associated with transformation and change, and it is there as high. And you're absolutely right, it should be there as high and it's been rated properly. I think that the risks that we're talking about around financial stability and affordability associated with the long-term plan, I do believe that what we've just discussed is captured as a part of that risk. I think we can share in more detail the description around that risk if that would be useful, but it certainly does capture that risk and hence its escalation too high because of exactly the discussions that we were having earlier.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I accept that point, and also, I had highlighted the comment on page 30. I just forgotten that there was that reference to transformation activity within the change capacity and resilience comment.
That's okay. There's been a lot of water under the bridge and through the pipes today, so we've gone through it. Are there any further questions? Councillor Blackler?
Just a comment on the back of Councillor Hopkins' point that the item second from the bottom on the first page of the risk register has a line there that says council's financial position becoming unsustainable.
Thank you for that point of clarification. Are there any further questions? No, if not, could I please ask somebody move that the Performance Audit and Risk Committee receives and notes the information presented in the risk management update today. Moved by Mayor Kircher, seconded by Deputy Mayor Halali. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you, that's carried. And given that that is the last item on our agenda today, I would like to thank all of you in the chamber and those online for your attendance and your thoughts today. And I declare the meeting closed.